Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're pulling on a thread that feels, well, it feels almost impossible. We're going to start in a peasant village in the 1600s, move through the starved-out streets of Leningrad, and end up in the very near future, September 2025, with a conversation that sounds like it's straight out of science.
It really does. Usually when we talk about Vladimir Putin, we're looking at troop movements, oil prices, that sort of thing. But the sources we've gathered for this dive suggest something else. To really understand the man in 2026, you have to look at the story he's built around his own family. And you have to look at this obsession with not dying.
That's the hook that got. We've got this intelligence report here, and it opens with this incident in Beirut, pretty for us, September 3rd, 20.
Right, that's our jumping off point. It's the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. China's putting on this massive, massive show. All the pomp and circumstance you can imagine.
And the guest list is, well, it's a who's who of the authoritarian world, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got Xi Jinping playing host, Kim Jong-un is there, and of course, Vladimir Putin. So picture it. The big parade is over, the cameras are supposedly off, and the three of them are just, taking a walk toward Tiananmen Square.
Thinking they're having a private chat.
But they miss a hot mic. And this is the moment that analysts are still just poring over. You'd think they'd be talking about the war in Ukraine or trade or
anything geopolitical.
Anything. But they weren't. They were talking about biotechnology.
Specifically organ transplants and 3D printing human tissue.
And the realistic prospect of living to be 150 years old. They weren't talking about succession. They were talking about immortality.
It's just so surreal. You have three leaders who hold the fate of billions in their hands, and they're seriously discussing how to extend their personal rule into the 22nd century. It's moved beyond politics.
It's become biological. And that, I think, is the real key to understanding Putin today in 2026. He isn't planning for a successor. He's planning to outlive the need for one. But to get how a former KGB agent gets to that point, we have to go all the way back.
Right, because the big question here is, who is this guy? Did he just emerge from the Soviet bureaucracy fully formed? Or is there a dynastic story here that explains this?
It's the whole Putin mythos. He wants to project this image of being a destined ruler, a new czar. But the historical records, what little there are, tell a much, much grittier story. So that's our mission today, to unpack that mythology. We're going from 17th century serfs to a cook who fed Stalin through a rat-infested courtyard and all the way to that hot mic in Beijing.
Okay, so let's start with that deep history. You're saying that tracing his family tree is actually really hard. Why is that?
It's incredibly difficult. I mean, for European nobility, we have records of everything. But for the class Putin's ancestors came from, they were basically invisible to the state. We're talking about a society built on serfdom.
Which was just slavery by another name.
It was. Until 1861, peasants were property. They were tied to the land. They couldn't leave. They didn't have last names in the way we think of them. The very first proper census in Russia wasn't until 1897. So trying to find a paper trail for one specific family is, well, it's almost impossible.
But someone found something.
They did. It's a very faint line, but it goes back to a man named Yakov Nikit around the year 1628. This was in the Tver region, northwest of Moscow.
1628, that's before the Pilgrims really got established in America.
It's deep history. And here's the little bit of irony Putin probably just loves. The land Yakov Nikitin lived on was owned by Ivan Romanov.
A Romanov?
The uncle of the very first Romanov Tsar.
So right from the beginning, the Putin line is in the shadow of imperial power. But, and this is the critical part, they weren't part of the power. They were the property of people close to power.
So they weren't courtiers, they were serfs.
Exactly. Dirt-poor serfs, living in wooden huts, surviving on whatever they could grow. There was no glory here, there was only survival. So let's jump forward a couple of centuries to where the official story, the Putin-approved story, really began. His grandfather, Spiridon Ivanovich, his life story reads like a propaganda.
Spiridon is where the myth-making kicks into high. He was born in 1879. And if you believe the official narrative, he was sort of the Forrest Gump of the Russian Revolution. He was just always in the room where it happened.
He started out as a cook, right?
He did. But not out of some grand culinary ambition. He was born into incredible poverty. He survived the 1891 famine, which killed hundreds of thousands. At age 12, his family sent him away to work at an inn. It wasn't about a career path. It was one less mouth to feed.
Just brutal pragmatism.
That was life. But the kid had a talent for cooking. He made his way to St. Petersburg, the capital, and got work as an apprentice. And this is where the legends start. The claim is he worked at the famous Hotel Astoria.
And he supposedly served Rasputin there.
That's the story that gets whispered. Rasputin, the mad monk who basically brought down the Tsar's regime. Now, is there any hard proof? Of course not. But it fits the narrative Putin wants to create. My family was always, close to the action, rubbing shoulders with history.
But the real bombshell claims are about what happened after the Bolsheviks.
Right. This is the Lenin and Stalin connection. And this comes from Putin himself in a 2018 documentary. He claims on camera that his grandfather Spiridon cooks for Lenin at his government dacha, and then later that he cooked for Joseph Stalin himself.
Okay, hang on. Cooking for Stalin is not like cooking for anyone else. Stalin was pathologically paranoid. He was convinced everyone was trying to poison him
Exactly. To be in Stalin's kitchen, you couldn't just be a good cook. You had to be vetted at the highest possible level. It implies you were trusted completely by the security service. It implies membership in the NKVD, the forerunner to the KGB.
So, by telling that one story, Putin's basically saying, my family isn't some random. We have a lineage of service and loyalty to secret police trusted us.
It's a way of creating a security state pedigree. But historians are? Well, they're deeply skeptical. For one thing, Spiridon lived a very long life. He died in 1965 at age 86. The idea that he was still the personal chef for Soviet leaders from the 1920s all the way into the 1960s is just, it's not plausible.
And most of the people who got that close to Stalin didn't die of it.
That's the other thing. Stalin's inner circle had an extremely high turnover, usually involving a bullet to the back of the head. So it's far more likely this is a story that's been embellished. It's a way for a gray bureaucrat who came out of nowhere to give himself a backstory worthy of the Kremlin.
It's fascinating. But if the grandfather's story is a carefully crafted myth, the story of Putin's parents feels like the complete op horror. There's no romance to it at all.
No, none. The story of his parents is the story of the 20th century for millions of Soviets. It's just one catastrophe after another. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, and his mother, Maria, were both born in 1911, married at 17.
Just in time for the worst of it.
Just in time for everything. Yeah. The famines, Stalin's purges, and then the big one, World War II, the Great Patriotic War. And I really don't think people in the West can fully grasp the scale of what Russia went through.
We hear the numbers, but the personal stories, I was looking at Vladimir Sr.'s service record, it's nightmarish.
It is. He was a submariner, but in 1941 when the Nazis invaded, the Red Army was so desperate they just threw him into the infantry on the Leningrad front. And in November of that year, he gets sent on what was, for all intents and purposes, a suicide mission.
This was the tongue mission I read about. What exactly is a tongue?
It's Red Army slang. A tongue is an enemy soldier you capture alive so you can interrogate him, so he can talk. Vladimir Sr.'s unit of 28 men was ordered to crawl through the frozen mud behind German lines and snatch an officer.
How did that work out?
It was a disaster. They were ambushed. The Germans just opened up on them. Out of 28 men, only a handful survived the initial fire. Putin's father made it by diving into a freezing swamp and, according to the story he told, breathing through a hollow reed while the Germans walked right past.
That's like something out of a Rambo movie.
It is, but the injuries are documented. He had severe shrapnel wounds in his leg, terrible frostbite. He was hospitalized for months, and in a very grim, ironic way, that injury saved his life.
Because it kept him out of Stalingrad.
Exactly. While he was recovering in the hospital, what was left of his unit was completely annihilated at Stalingrad. So he survived the war, but with a permanent, painful limp. He was one of the lucky ones.
But while he's injured, his wife, Maria, is stuck inside the besieged city of Leningrad.
The Siege of Leningrad. It's one of the most brutal events in modern history. A city of millions, cut off for nearly 900 days. No food, no heat, no electricity. People were eating wallpaper paste, boiling leather shoes for broth. It was apocalyptic.
And Maria was there through all of it.
She nearly starved to death. Putin tells this story, and who knows how much is true. But he says his father got a short leave from the hospital and came back to their apartment building to see men carrying bodies out. He recognized his wife's shoes on one of the corpses.
He thought she was dead.
They were taking her to a mass grave. He supposedly ran over, started yelling that she was still alive, and they found a faint breath, carried her inside, and nursed her back to health. It's a dramatic story, but given that over 1 million civilians died in that siege, it's not outside the realm of possibility.
But they had already lost so much. They had children before the war.
This is the core trauma of that family. Vladimir Putin was not their first son. He wasn't even their second. Their first, Albert, died in before the war started, and their second son, Victor, died of diphtheria in 1942 during the worst of this.
So by the time the war is over, this couple is in their mid-30s, they're physically broken, they've lost 2 children, and their city is a pile of rubble.
And then 7 years later, into that world of grief and trauma, Vladimir Putin is born, October 7, 1952. His parents are both 41 years old. For Maria to have a healthy baby after what her body had been through was seen as a small miracle.
He was a miracle child.
He was what psychologists would call the replacement child. He was born into this vacuum of loss. He carried all their hopes, their fears, their grief for the brothers he never knew. The weight on a child like that is just immense. You're not just living for yourself, you're living for the ghost.
And there's also that strange footnote in the files, the woman named Vera Putina.
Yes, you have to mention it because it adds to the mystery. In 1999, right as Putin was taking power, this woman in the country of Georgia came forward and claimed she was his real mother. Her story was that he was an illegitimate child she couldn't care for, so she sent him to live with his grandparent, who then effectively gave him up for adoption to the Putins in Leningrad.
Any truth to it?
It's impossible to say. The Kremlin has always denied it furiously. The woman died in 2023, never changing her story. But true or not, it just feeds into this idea that his origins are deliberately shrouded in fog. We don't really know for sure who he is.
So Young Vladimir grows up in this post-war city, but not in a nice part of town. Talk about the apartment, the kommunalka.
Right, a communal apartment on Bissau Lane. Imagine a big pre-revolutionary apartment that's been subdivided. So you have several families living in what was once a single-family home. The Putin's father, mother, and son lived in one 200-square-foot room.
And the amenities?
There were none. No hot water, no bath. The kitchen was just the stove and a shared hallway. The toilet was in a cold little closet on the stairwell landing. And the stairwell itself, that's where Putin says he got his real education.
There are rats.
It's from the rats. He tells this story over and over again. It's clearly formative for him. He said the stairwell was swarming with them. One day, he and his friends were chasing a particularly big one with a stick, and they cornered it.
And it didn't run.
It had nowhere left to run. So it turned and it lunged at him, a cornered rat attacking a boy. Putin said he was terrified, and he learned a lesson he never forgot.
Never corner an enemy.
And more importantly, if you are the one being cornered, you must attack first. You have to be more vicious than your opponent. You have to jump for the throat.
That's his entire foreign policy doctrine in one anecdote.
It's the Leningrad courtyard doctrine. He sees the West and NATO expansion as an attempt to corner Russia. So what does he do? He lunges. He attacks first. That's Ukraine.
He wasn't exactly a star pupil early on either.
No, he was a troublemaker. His teachers called him a hooligan. He got into street fights. He hung out in the courtyards with local gangs. This was not a boy destined for greatness. This was a street kid fighting for his place in the pecking order.
So what turned it around? How does he get from there to law school?
Two things. First was sports, specifically Sambo, a Soviet martial art, and then judo. Judo gave him discipline. It also taught him a crucial lesson: leverage. How a smaller, weaker person can use an opponent's own strength and momentum against them. It's a perfect metaphor for how he views Russia versus the United States.
And the second thing?
Ambition. He read a book or saw a movie about a Soviet spy and decided, that's what I want to be. He realized that real power didn't come from being the toughest guy in the courtyard. It came from being in the system, the ultimate system, the KGB.
So he knew he needed an education for that.
He knew law school was the pipeline. So he buckled down, got his grades up, and got into Leningrad State University. He joined the Communist Party. He did everything right to get noticed. And sure enough, the KGB was watching.
And they recruited him straight out of university in '95?
The day he graduated, he walked out of the university and straight into the 401st KGB trainings. His dream had come true. He was part of the sword and shield of the Soviet Union.
But the reality of his KGB career was maybe a little less glamorous than the movies he'd watched?
A lot less glamorous. This is another part of the myth, are these wild stories about him being a deep cover agent in, New Zealand or somewhere.
Sure.
It's complete fantasy. He was a mid-level bureaucrat.
A paper pusher?
A paper pusher. He monitored foreign students. He wrote reports on dissidents. For 10 years, he did this. Finally, in 1985, he gets his big foreign assignment. But it's not to Washington or London or Paris.
It's to Dresden, East Germany.
Which was a provincial backwater. East Germany was already a Soviet satellite. It wasn't exactly enemy territory. His job was to be a liaison with the Stasi, the East German secret police. He lived in a drab apartment building. He drank a lot of German beer and, by his own admission, got a bit fat.
So he's living this comfortable, if boring, middle-class spy life. He has his wife. His 2 young daughters were born there. It's predictable.
It was very stable until November 1989.
The Berlin Wall comes down.
And Putin's world collapses. This is the second great trauma that defined. He's inside the KGB headquarters in Dresden as protesters who have just stormed the local Stasi headquarters start to gather outside his building.
And he's in charge.
He's the senior officer on duty. He's panicking. He and his colleagues are frantically burning documents, incriminating files, lists of agents, their entire network. They're stuffing them into a furnace, and he says the furnace got so hot it literally exploded.
What an image. The system literally bursting into flames.
And the crowd outside is getting bigger and louder. So Putin goes out to the gate to confront them. He bluffs, says he has armed guards who are authorized to shoot. The crowd hesitate, but he knows he's alone. So he gets on the phone to the nearest Soviet military base and begs for reinforcement. He asks for tanks.
And what was the response?
This is the phrase he has repeated his entire career. The officer on the other end said, "We cannot do anything without orders from Moscow." And Moscow is silent.
Moscow is silent.
Those 3 words. For him, that was the ultimate betrayal. He saw the Soviet Union, a superpower, just evaporate. Not because of a military defeat, but because of a collapse of will at the center. He watched Gorbachev dither, and right there, next to that exploding furnace, he learned his second great lesson. Weakness and indecision are death. Never wait for orders. Always be the one who...
So in 1990, she comes home, but the home he comes back to, gone.
It's a different planet. The USSR is disintegrating. The economy is an absolute free fall. And here's Lieutenant Colonel Putin, 38 years old, with a skill set recruiting spies and writing reports that is totally useless in this new capitalist Russia.
He said he thought about driving a taxi.
He's part of the man of the people story he tells. I had to feed my family. Who knows? But he didn't end up driving a cab. he found a much better ride.
Anatoly Sobchak.
His old law professor from university. Sobchak had become this big democratic reformer and was now the mayor of St. Petersburg. He needed someone he could trust, someone who knew how the old system worked, to be his fix. He hired Putin.
And this is where the quiet paper pusher starts to become something.
This is where he learns about power and money. St. Petersburg in the 90s was a war zone. They called it the gangster capital of Russia. State assets factories, ports, building were all being sold off for pennies on the dollar. And Putin was at the center of it. He was the city's head of external relations.
Meaning if you were a Western company and you wanted to do a deal, you had to see him.
You had to go through him. He's the man who signed the papers. He was the one who decided which oligarchs and which criminal gangs got a piece of the pie. There was a huge investigation into a deal where he licensed the export of raw material, oil, timber, in exchange for food for the city.
And what happened?
The materials went out, the money vanished, the food never showed up. The city council voted to have him fired for corruption.
But he wasn't.
Sobchak protected him because Putin was loyal, efficient, and discreet. He was the perfect gray cardinal. He learned how to operate in the shadow. He learned who was who. He built his network.
And that loyalty to his boss gets him noticed by the biggest boss of all, Boris.
In 1996, Sobchak loses his re-election campaign. Putin's out of job, so he follows his connections to Moscow. And his rise there, it's breathtakingly fast. 1997, he's deputy chief of the presidential staff. By 1998, he's the head of the FSB, the new KGB. He's running the whole show.
And then comes the big moment, New Year's Eve, 1999.
The abdication. Boris Yeltsin is old, he's sick, he's drunk, and he's wildly unpopular. His inner circle, the family, as they were called, are terrified that as soon as he leaves office, they'll all be prosecuted for the massive corruption of the 90s. They need a successor who will guarantee their safety.
And they look at Putin and see a nobody, a functionary.
They see a guy with no personal power base,
Yeah.
a loyal servant. They think he'll be their puppet. So on live television, Yeltsin resigns and makes Vladimir Putin the acting president.
And Putin's very first decree as president is what?
To grant Yeltsin and his family full immunity from prosecution. He held up his end of the bargain. But the oligarchs who put him in power made a colossal miscalculation. They thought they had hired a security guard. They had, in fact, just handed the keys to the castle to the new king.
So Putin takes over, and for the first few years, for the average Russian, things actually got better.
A lot better. We call it his golden era. From about 2000 to 2008, the economy was growing at 7% a year. Pensions were paid on time. After the absolute chaos and poverty of the 90s, it felt like a miracle.
Was that his economic genius at work?
It was luck. Oil prices went through the roof. Russia was floating on a sea of petrodollars. But Putin, very skillfully, took all the credit. He made an unwritten deal with the Russian people. I give you stability and a rising standard of living, and in return, you stay out of politics. You let me handle things.
And the West bought into it, too. I remember George W. Bush saying he looked into Putin's eyes and got a sense of his soul.
Oh, everyone bought in. Germany built massive gas pipelines, making themselves dependent on it. London became a playground for his oligarchs. He was seen as a modernizer, a pragmatist we could do business with.
Even though the warning signs were already there, they were flashing red.
Huge red flags. The Second Chechen War was unbelievably brutal. He leveled the city of Grozny. And then in 2008, he invaded Georgia. He carved off 2 regions, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and just declared them independent. It was a test run.
A blueprint for Ukraine.
Exactly.
Okay.
He was testing the West's reaction, and our reaction was basically a slap on the wrist. And that's when he made his move to consolidate power for good, the castling.
This chess move.
The Constitution had a 2 consecutive term. So in 2008, his time was up. Did he retire? No. He just swapped job with his prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev. Medvedev became a placeholder president for 4 years while Putin pulled all the strings from behind the curtain.
It was a total sham.
It was. And when he came back to the presidency in 2012, people were angry. There were huge protests in Moscow. The new middle class, the very people who had benefited from his rule, were out in the streets chanting, "Russia without Putin."
And that had to have scared him.
It triggered his Dresden PTSD, the mob in the street, the sense of losing control. And that's when he changed. He pivoted from being the president of economic stability to being the president of imperial restoration. He needed an external enemy to justify his eternal rule.
And that enemy, first and foremost, was Ukraine.
Ukraine is everything to him. In his worldview, a strong, independent, pro-Western Ukraine on Russia's border is an existential threat. He truly believes Ukrainians and Russians are one people, which is a polite way of saying Ukrainians are just Russians who don't know it yet.
The point of no return was 2014.
The Euromaidan Revolution. Ukrainians overthrew their corrupt, pro-Russian president. Putin didn't see a popular uprising. He saw a CIA-backed coup. He saw the West cornering him.
So, like the rat in the stairwell, he jumped.
He annexed Crimea with a swift, almost bloodless operation. His popularity at home shot up to nearly 90%, and then he started the proxy war in the Donbass. And once again, the West's response was weak. Some sanctions, but we kept buying his oil and gas.
We were literally funding his war machine.
We were, and that convinced him he could get away with more. He thought the full-scale invasion in 2022 would be a repeat of Crimea. He thought he'd be in Kiev in 3 days.
A historic miscalculation.
The biggest of his career. He believed his own propaganda. He thought Ukrainians would greet his soldiers with flowers. He was met with fierce, unified resistance.
So let's fast forward to our present, 2026. After 4 years of grinding war, what does the map look like?
It's a stalemate, but a bloody one. Russia controls a land bridge connecting Russia to Crimea along the coast, but the cost has been astronomical.
What are the casualty figures?
The sources suggest that over 1 million Russian men have been killed or seriously wounded. 1 million. That's a demographic catastrophe for a country that was already facing a population crisis.
Yeah.
He's hollowed out a generation.
It's gotten so bad that he's had to look for soldiers in some very strange places.
The North Koreans. By early 2026, it's an open secret that North Korean troops are fighting and dying for Russia in Ukraine. The great Russian patriot has to beg for cannon fodder from Kim Jong-un. It tells you everything you need to know about the state of his army.
And then there's the American political situation, the return of Donald Trump in the 2024 election.
Right. Trump came in promising to end the war in 24 hours. The reality, of course, proved to be much more difficult.
There were a series of peace talks in 2025.
Failed talks in Riyadh, Istanbul. But the big one was in Alaska, August 15th, 2020. Just Trump.
And crucially, Ukraine wasn't invited.
No, it was a throwback to the Cold War. Two great powers carving up the world, but it failed because Putin's demands are non-negotiable. He wants a permanent, legally binding guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. He wants it demilitarized. He essentially wants to erase it as a sovereign state. And even Trump couldn't sell that to the world without looking like he'd completely capitulated.
It feels like Putin's real enemy is, which brings us right back to that bait. The whole system is built around him. Can't exist without him.
That's the terrifying fragility of it all. This isn't a stable system with institutions. It's a personalized dictatorship. He's systematically destroyed every alternative power center. The only thing that matters is the health and survival of one man.
And he's taken steps to ensure that survival, starting with the money. Let's talk about the fort.
His official salary is something like $150,000 a year. He declares a small apartment, a couple of old cars, and a trailer.
A trailer. It's
absurd. The reality is, he is almost certainly the richest man on Earth, with a hidden fortune estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
How is it hidden?
Through an elaborate network of childhood friends, distant cousins, even his daughter's former boyfriend. The most famous example from the Panama Papers was a classical cellist named Sergei Roldugin, who had $2 billion flowing through his accounts. Right. It's a system of financial cutout, and the assets themselves are extravagant. The $500 super yacht, the massive palace on the Black Sea with its own private church and hockey rink. He treats the entire Russian state as his personal piggy bank.
And his personal life is just as opaque. His family is almost a state secret.
It is. He divorced his wife Ludmila back in 2014. But the rumor, a very strong rumor in Moscow, is that he has a second family with the former Olympic gymnast, Alina Kabaev.
The sources mention children.
2 sons, allegedly, born in 2015 and 2019, named Ivan and Vladimir.
Another Vladimir.
If they exist, they're being raised in complete secrecy, probably in a guarded compound in Switzerland or Russia. Are they potential heirs to a new Putin dynasty? Nobody knows.
But we do know about his official daughters, and this is where the whole story comes full circle, back to the science of immortality.
This is the critical connection. His oldest daughter, Maria Vorontsova, is a pediatric endocrinologist, but her research specialist, funded with billions from the state, is genetics and longevity. She's at the head of Russia's anti-aging research.
She's working on the science to extend her father's life.
It seems undeniable. And his other daughter, Katerina Tikhanova, runs a massive AI institute at Moscow State University. He's put his own flesh and blood in charge of the technologies he believes will secure his future, both politically and biologically.
The contradictions are just staggering. He's a Soviet man who idolizes the Tsars. He's a supposed man of the people with a gold-plated palace. He's a devout Christian who's using science to try and become a god.
It only seems contradictory if you're looking for a coherent ideology. But if you look at it through the lens of psychology, it's perfectly consistent. It's the psychology of a man who is absolutely terrified of the end of his power, the end of his country, the end of his life. He saw the end once in Dresden.
And he spent his entire life making sure he never feels that powerless again.
He's been building fortresses, a financial fortress for his wealth, a military fortress around Russia, and now a biological fortress for his own body. He is determined to outlast all of his enemies.
So to bring it all together, we started with this bizarre hot mic moment in Beijing.
A moment that sounded crazy in 2025, but now looking back, it seems like the most honest thing he's said in years. He turns 80 in 2032. He's outwardly healthy, despite 2 decades of rumors about cancer or Parkinson's.
He takes obsessive care of himself.
He does. He could very realistically rule for another decade, maybe longer. And if his daughter's research pays off, if they find ways to extend vitality, then he might not be planning to leave at all.
Which is the scariest part. The system is so brittle. It all rests on him. If he pulls this off, Russia becomes a kind of gerontoc, frozen in the worldview of one man who is still fighting. But if he doesn't, gets sick. If biology finally...
That's the nightmare scenario. He's built no off-ramps, no succession plan. When he goes, the power vacuum will be immense. You'll have warlords like the Chechens, rival security services, angry oligarchs, all fighting for the peace with 6,000 nuclear weapons in the middle of it all.
It leaves you with a really chilling final thought. We see these dictators as permanent, but they're mortal. And the source material makes it clear that Putin's own daughter is running a state-funded project to fight that mortality. So if that conversation in Beijing is his real plan, he's not looking for a successor. He's trying to make succession irrelevant.
And that raises the ultimate question for the 21st century. What happens to a nuclear superpower when its leader decides he's no longer bound by the laws of nature? What happens when the man with his finger on the button refuses to accept that his time?
A question I don't think any of us really want to see answered.
Oh, we don't.
We'd love to know what you think. Look at the sources. Do you buy the stories about his grandfather cooking for Stalin and this immortality project? Is it a serious scientific endeavor or just the delusion of an aging?
Let us know.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll talk to you next time.
Stay safe.